10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast, episode 257. Hey everybody, welcome back to episode 257 of the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast. Welcome back in. Thank you so much for listening week in and week out. Really excited about this episode. I think this is really going to provide a lot of value, and I think that this lesson is going to be one of the most important that we've ever done in 257 episodes. So that's definitely saying something. Now, before we jump into the episode, I just want to remind you that this is a listener-supported show. We do not have advertising on this program, so all the support comes from generous listeners like you. And for one small monthly fee, you can make sure the podcast keeps coming out week in and week out. And you can also get all of the materials for every episode, including PDFs and audio examples and all sorts of other goodies. So if you want to support the show and that sounds good to you, you can go to our website, 10minutejazzlesson.com, click on one of the Patreon banners. That'll bring you over to the platform that allows you to support us, and get yourself signed up for a $3 or a $5 level, and you get some different rewards for each of those monthly donations. Got to give a shout out to our two new $5 patrons this week. Thank you to Eric and Aaron. We really appreciate you guys signing up. And thank you to everybody over there that has been a member for months or years. You are really the people that make it possible for this show to come out. So head over 10minutejazzlesson.com, click on one of the Patreon banners, instant access to all of that stuff. Okay, so this week we are continuing our work on playing more interesting lines, some ways to approach practicing and line writing and line playing that I think are really going to improve your approach to playing the most interesting material possible. So the first week we went over question and answer phrases. Last week we went over writing kind of a plain vanilla diatonic line and then going through and re-evaluating what you can do to turn some of those notes into tension, right? To more altered lines. This week, we're going to talk about a great way to make your lines more rhythmically and harmonically interesting by removing notes from them. And I really think that this is one of the top ways that I learned how to play more interesting and varied lines. It also really helps if you feel like you're too busy of a player, which is definitely what I think about myself. I fall into the trap all the time of playing too many notes, and this exercise has really helped me to tame that a little bit. I still get into the situation where every now and again I get carried away and I'm just playing too much, but this has really helped a lot. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to dive right into example number 1. So what I've done is over a concert B-flat 7 chord, I've written a 4-bar phrase, and I'm using running eighth notes for 3.5 bars. So no rests. What I did was I tried to just come up with an interesting line that filled every single beat in 4 measures. So let's check out the original line that I came up with, and then we're going to talk about what I did to turn it into, I believe, a much more interesting line. So this is the top line, example number 1 on your PDF for this week. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. One, two, 1, 2, 3, 4. So I like that line. It's interesting. There's some chromatic movement. I think it has a good texture. But the problem is that it's rhythmically kind of uninteresting. And I think it's a little bit too busy. So now I'm going to go through the process that I used to make it more interesting. So with the first variation on your sheet, what I tried to do was add some rests in that were 1 beat or shorter. So you'll notice in the first measure, I added an eighth note rest. In the second measure, I added a quarter note rest. In the third measure, I added an eighth note rest. And then in the fourth measure, another eighth note rest. So what this will do is it will just give the line a little bit of breathing room. It's a little bit of rhythmic variety. You'll notice in the first measure, I created some syncopation by removing beat 2 and coming in on the and of 2. It gives me a little bit more interesting stuff going on. And that's really it as far as the syncopation. The other rests that I put in there are on the ands, and the line resumes on the beat. But even just that little bit of syncopation in measure 1, it really adds a lot to the line. Now, this is going to kind of seem counterintuitive, but by removing notes, I actually made the line sound more complicated and more interesting. And that's what resting does. Because if you have a command over syncopation and where to rest, it's actually going to add so much to the line. And to tell you the truth, I just like this second line so much better than the original line with these added rests. So let's check out example 1, variation 1. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. One, two, 1, 2, 3, 4. Hear how much more interesting that line is? It's amazing what removing a couple of well-placed notes can do and adding just a tiny, tiny bit of silence. Really, it just brings the line to life. It turns it from something that's kind of forgettable into all of a sudden something that's a lot more interesting. Okay, so for variation 2, what I tried to do was employ much longer rests. So I removed a lot more notes. You'll notice in measure 1, I removed beats 2 and 3. In measure 2, I removed the and of 3 and beat 4. Measure 3, I removed beat 1 and beat 4. And then in measure 4, I kind of just left it the way that it was because there was already some rest built into that measure. Now, this is my favorite. It's kind of funny. I thought that number 2 would be my favorite, but after listening to these, this one is by far my favorite one. So that tells me something. I really like what lines sound like when they're pretty sparse. But that 100% goes against my natural instinct to fill up every measure with notes. So this is really teaching me something, and I hope you have similar thoughts when you are writing your own lines. Let's check out the second variation, and hear how much space I've added. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. One, two, 1, 2, 3, 4. There's just so much more breathing room in that line than the first one especially, but even the second one. And I think I dig that the most. You might like the second one better. Heck, maybe you even like the first one better. But that third one, I really think has some great texture to it, and it sounds like a really well thought out line. Whereas the first one to me just kind of sounds like a jumble of notes almost. So I really think that removing stuff can really help the structure and the clarity of your lines. So what I've done is I've prepared a second example for you. This time it's over a 3-6-2-5 in the key of B flat. And I've done basically the same thing. So my original line was just all eighth notes, all running eighth notes for 4 measures. Then in the first variation, I tried to add rests that were 1 beat or less. And then in the second variation, I tried to add rests that were much longer. So if you look at the PDF, you will notice that it goes from the most packed to the most sparse once we go through the two variations. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually just play all three of these lines back to back right away, just so you can hear the stark difference between them one after the other without me interjecting with a bunch of talking. So here is example number 2 and the two variations. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. One, two, 1, 2, 3, 4. One, two, 1, 2, 3, 4. So that one's really close for me between number 2 and number 3. I think I like number 2 the best on that one. It just works really well with all that harmonic motion going on in the background. But I really like number 3 as well. And it's just so striking to me to hear how much those lines improved by removing notes from them. So I hope that that's a good lesson for all of you on, sometimes just taking things away are a lot more valuable than adding things to your line. And that can be kind of a mantra, kind of a underlying principle going forward for you, is just how much the clarity increases when you add some rests into the mix. So your homework is going to be to do exactly what I did. So take each progression, the one over the plain old dominant chord, write a line that's running eighth notes, then write one that introduces some short rests, and then write another variation that introduces some longer rests, some more silence than the first one. And then do the same thing over the 3, 6, 2, 5. And just watch how much this affects the lines in hopefully a really great way. You might have to go through some different iterations, some different edits of each of your variations. This was something that I sat down and I really, really tried to choose great notes to remove, right? So I had to really think logically, why am I removing this note? Is it going to sound good? A little bit of experimentation. And I finally got to the examples that I really liked at the end of the day. So that's what I want you to do. Now, if you are a member of Patreon, you're going to get the demos of the lines as separate audio files, and you're also going to get the piano backing track that I made for myself for both of these progressions. So that'll be a great way to try your lines and see if they came out the way that you wanted them to. So again, the way to get those is 10minutejazzlesson.com. Click on one of the Patreon banners and grab those files. Okay, thanks for tuning in, everybody. If you have any questions, drop them in the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Community Facebook group, or you can email me at 10minutejazzlesson@gmail.com. Happy to answer any of those questions. Hope you're all doing well out there. Hope you're all staying safe and healthy, and we will talk to you next week with a brand new episode. Have an awesome weekend and have fun with this stuff. Talk to you soon. Bye.